of owning a cafe and other heroic deeds by Beware the Tristero. Chapter 52. Credit where credit is due. The next 10 minutes had been a blur, but as Mitsuki dragged him towards the paramedics, Shouta couldn't help his relief. They'd done it. Tomer was safe. All of them were. And as he watched dispassionately, the police force officers, alongside 4 new pros who'd rushed to the scene on Sugarame Kenji's orders, jump into the hole All Might had buried All for One in with all kinds of fancy quirk-restricting bindings, he found that he could care less that the man was breathing. He never thought of himself as particularly bloodthirsty, but he wouldn't have shed a tear at the bastard's funeral either. "Aizawa Nissan! That was amazing!" Noof! Blinking, the sound of Mitsuki's laughter joining full throttles and now Masa's with Ragdoll too. She'd been squealing through the open channel a lot, filling his senses. Shouta folded his arms about his brother, almost his height now, amidst the wrecked airstrip scene. You are pretty great yourself now, Kiku," he praised warmly, his left arm slung across the costumed boy's shoulders as the 4 of them continued their approach to the ambulances that had been allowed through a police blockade. A police blockade which was keeping out hordes of media vans. No thanks. "Ma, Shinji-kun, why didn't you tell me that your older brother was so competent?" Full Throttle grinned from next to her student. "You wouldn't happen to be interested in teaching it on Aizawa-san?" Regarding the woman with a nonplussed expression. Somewhere, he was sure he'd just heard Nezu violently sneeze. He was probably eavesdropping and cursing right now. President Mike would have hacked into their communication relays so they could listen in, surely. He quickly shook his head, whilst his care-center sibling snickered. Sorry, Sensei, but Aizawa is way too busy to have a think of it," he told her, his tone laced with mirth, whilst Mitsuki nodded along with a chuckle. "He's right, my friend," she smirked. "And besides, you'd have to convince all of his customers, the rest of his younger siblings, and a wider community of fans he secured over the past few months to let him go," she stated, her smirk fierce as she wrapped an arm around his waist. "Nah, let's just say that there's no chance that we'd ever consider it," she preened, her smile broadening as he similarly curled his arm about her, his eyes casting around as the teacher tried to argue. His tree-quirked brother laughed and the blonde tittered. God, they'd been so lucky, hadn't they? Best Genus, an up-and-coming pro destined for the top 10 list if Katsuki's praise of him was anything to go by, was laid out upon a stretcher and being carried to help alongside Gran Torino, still unconscious, but he'd live, and Sir Night, who he nodded to as he passed them on his own stretcher. The smile he'd received back was breathtaking. The other pros, some limping, all smiling despite their injuries, were similarly ambling along with the aid of police force officers, their bodies moving through the torn-up landscape and skirting the blistering hot lava, boulders of earth, and jet plane pieces. Damn! They'd had to go through all of this just to take out one villain. He was so glad that he'd been here, that Full Throttle had enabled him to keep the bastard off kilter, but still it made him wonder. Surely a man powerful enough to do all of this had many similarly powerful lackeys, and not that he should bring it up. He wasn't a police force officer or pro, but he'd not heard anything about the raid on Jaku Hospital or whether Garaki had been arrested or not. He was sure that the, by all accounts, frail doctor wouldn't make a move against them on his own. However, knowing that he was still at large was troubling. Oi! I know that look, and I am telling you right now as your brother who loves you to knock it off. Blinking out of his thoughts, his eyes sliding to Kamui once. Shouta smiled and tightened the arm around the youth's shoulder. He pushed. And what look is that, eh? God, he was so unbelievably proud of him. He'd overcome so much, lived through the pain and stigma of being so different compared to his peers, and gone on to become a person destined for a pro hero license. You're overthinking, and we're still looking for the storm cloud on this perfect summer of a morning show, the other accused, his brown eyes narrowing at him through the mask he wore. Honestly, you should be strutting, man. You bunted one of the great threats our country has ever known, and it's costing all balls. He started when his pro mentor tittered. Sorry, Sensei, but he did, you know. Oh, yes, the daintier of the two costumed women grinned. Bakugo-san and I had front row seats," she added, the four of them laughing. "And, although crudely phrased, Shinji-kun is right, Aizawa-san," she offered fondly. "This is a time for rest and celebration," she stated, her smile resplendent. "Any other bad news will have to take a back seat for another day, don't you think?" Sat with 5 paramedics all fawning over him, Shouta sighed. No, he was not going to the hospital, just in case. Thank you, he was fine. The bruises on his neck, although still darkening, weren't anything to worry about. He just wore a bandana until they went away. His little brother, bruised, tired and hungry, but otherwise fine, full throttle, who had a sprained ankle, and Mitsuki, similarly bruised with light burns across her palms and fingers, were similarly sat in the hastily erected medical tent, whilst all of the pros who'd been injured, All Might included, he'd wanted to see him before he went, but still, were already on their way to the hospital. The clean-up crews were busily working away. The Nomu Kurogiri had been locked up and shipped off to Tartarus alongside Oliver One, and another man who'd identified himself as Twice was being checked over, treated, and assured that he was safe. He'd seen him as he'd been wheeled past in a wheelchair, his shuddering form draped in a shock blanket, as he was ferried to a private unmarked ambulance. Now Masa, still in their ears along with his lieutenant, had told them all that the man was being taken to a mental health ward to be reviewed and cared for. With any luck, he'd be rehabilitated and given a new lease on life thanks to therapy, counseling, and further help that Sir Night-Eye's agency was already putting into place for him. Thank goodness. Aizawa-san, we'll be bringing a car around for you in 5 minutes or so, but there are quite a few people who are demanding to speak with you, if that's okay. We just wanted to make sure that you were fine before patching them all in, and Dr. Riku has just given you the all clear, so... Blinking, his brows lifting at the sudden crackling across the earpiece he wore, no doubt connecting him to a private line, Shouta gracefully took the cup of water a paramedic offered him and waited. He wouldn't have put it past Dabi and Tomra to bully the local pros into getting the police force to connect them through. Or maybe it was Nezu. Although, if the white fur man was calling anyone, he had a sneaking suspicion it would be Full Throttle that he'd contact. She was currently avidly chatting away on her phone with Naoki stood over her shoulder, definitely talking to Ketsubutsu Academy's principal, her eyes moving to him every so often. He checked his own phone, of course, and texted his teens that he was fine, but would probably need to give an official statement before he got home. Wonderful! And asked for an update from Hitoshi's teachers. The boy still knew nothing, thank goodness. He'd talk everything over with him and the other tots later, and found his chat apps crammed with messages. His pros, of course. Ragdoll had been bursting during the radio silence imposed during the mission, had inundated him. A few of the cafe customers had asked if he was all right, since the Noronaka was closed until tomorrow, and so Night-Eye, ever the Joker, had simply written, "Kat, that is a wonderful moniker. Is it going to be your official pro hero name now?" Yeah, right. Although there was a pro called Wash, wasn't there? So, Cat Dad didn't sound too ridiculous, but... Shouta-kun? Feeling a sudden tightening in his chest, the image of this speaker struggling on his knees, his bodysuit torn and righteous anger giving way to frustration and despair, the cafe owner swallowed thickly. God, he hadn't been expecting. He'd been so worried that he was... Are you all right? He asked, the sounds of people milling all around him dying away as he leaned into the plastic chair he'd been sat in, his mostly bare legs. He'd face off against the country's top villain in shorts of all things, dotted with plasters and bandages from the few scrapes he'd collected, stiffening. He struggled to keep his water cup steady. It's thanks to you that I am... Shouta-kun, I had wanted to see you, but I can come to you. He heard himself saying, his cheeks slightly pinking at how quickly the words had left him. The kids aren't expecting me back until later, and... Yes, I'd like that, if that's all right with you. The big lug stated, and wouldn't you know it, virtually the second he'd asked, Tsugaraki Kenji had appeared at his side with a smile and a nod. You'll need special clearance to access his ward, Aizawa-kun, he stated, his tone lacquered with an awe which overlapped his usual professionalism. It'd be my honor to escort you whilst you take your other calls. He'd hugged Naoki goodbye and watched as he and Full Throttle had headed off back to Ketsubutsu Academy. When the blue-haired woman had given him 3 business cards, all containing private numbers, Okay, and winked at him before she left. He had not been able to hold his laughter when Mitsuki called after her. Ah, he's not leaving Mr. Tapu, so good luck relocating our second-rate school over here. Nestor would be proud, he was sure. Then, after similarly embracing her, the crimson-eyed woman grinned and lightly punched his shoulder. Give that powerhouse a big hug from me and tell him to come by. The cafe's in, all right? She was heading home to where her husband was anxiously waiting. She'd shown him a photograph of the victory meal he made for her. Adorable. He had promised to relay the message and then eagerly hopped into the unmarked police car, with tinted windows, thank God. As they drove away from the airstrip, he cringed as reporters, journalists, and hero fanatics shoved flashing cameras wherever they could reach. How irrational. And relaxed in the back seat before taking more calls. So? Hey, he replied softly. We did it, guys. Shigaragi-san is on his way to the maximum security wing as we speak. He breathed, his shoulders finally relaxing. You're free now, Tomura. We just need to go over a few things with Sugadame-san before Hitoshi gets home, okay? And me and Dabi will be with you, alright? He heard the other release a shaky, sniffled breath, and at the rustle of fabric, he could almost see his older teen hugging the shorter. Everything's going to be fine now, and I'm so proud of you and how brave you've been. He praised. I'll see you both soon. After he'd chatted with Hizashi, he, Nimori, and Oboro, it was nice to know them all as people now, were still at the cafe, who had promised him faithfully that the teens were fine. He'd sagged into his seat. Damn, now that all of his adrenaline had worn off, everything was getting a bit blurry around the edges. How did people do crazy stuff like this all day, every day for a living? Was it pride he'd felt when he'd embraced Naoki, or just sheer thankful relief? Did he want to think about his tots fully grown rushing into this kind of danger? Because sure, All for One was out of the way now, and he hoped that that would always be the case, but villainy wouldn't stop overnight. Who'd be the next big bad the people he'd come to know and care about would face? With Shigaraki currently deposed, the title of king amidst the criminal underworld was now up for grabs, wasn't it? We're nearly at the hospital. Aizawa-san! Are you alright? Just overthinking. It's a habit of mine, apparently. He tried to grin, his eyes meeting Sugarame's through the rear-view mirror, memories of the night of Kimiko's arrest suddenly flashing through his mind. Not good. If you don't mind me saying so, Aizawa-san, what you displayed this morning goes far beyond the realms of overthinking. He complimented with a laugh. I mean, whereas I do not condone reckless actions, even in my own ranks, How in the world did you come up with a plan to trick him so easily? He asked. It was a logical ruse. He replied mildly, his dark, tired eyes now looking the cityscape as it sped past them, the looming form of Musutafu's hero hospital rising up in the foreground. When that man came to my cafe, he was particularly friendly and falsely well-meaning. He offered. He seemed to enjoy the pies and muffins I made, and well, I was hoping seeing me there would be quite a surreal experience, and one just strange enough for him to pause. He admitted, distracting him into thinking my quirk was something he could defend against, was something that I didn't know I'd be able to do until I happened upon Bakugo-san and the others. He mused. Besides, I knew that All Might wouldn't let the eagle maniac kill me. He grinned, their eyes meeting again. Where'd he get his muffins from if I was dead, Watching the dog-faced man laugh so loudly that he actually barked. The noise that caused the driver he sat beside to swerve slightly. Maybe his third career path should be instead of comedy. He then had to listen to Sugarame-san as he told him repeatedly that he was worth much more to everyone alive, regardless of baked goods. Maybe he should have recorded the rant, because that's what it was, and handed copies over to his teens, tots, and other friends, so they could just blast it at him full volume instead of having to repeat themselves so often. Such good people. However, as the car pulled into a small private underground parking lot, Shouta somehow managed to get out of the vehicle with his hearing still intact. Okay, Aizawa-san! Please follow me, but just so we're clear. What do you need to remember? I'm a loved and valued individual who needs to know and accept that without deflecting the sentiments with humor. Sir, He deadpanned despite a light baking of his cheeks. Was this how his teens had felt when he'd spoken to them about loving themselves more? Damn! Good! The beagle-quirked officer stated with a curt nod, the pair of them walking through the well-lit, stark, and cement-colored area towards a set of gunmetal elevator doors. But don't think for 1 second that I'll not be checking in with Dobby Gun and Tom Raccoon to make sure that my words have gotten through to you, all right? Goody! He thought with a little well-covered snicker, his mind already conjuring up a scenario where he was sat down in an interrogation room with the three of them, his tots, and the pros all crowding around him whilst they made several arguments as to why he didn't appreciate himself enough. It wasn't as though he didn't appreciate himself, but he was just a person. Incredible or not, and if he was honest, he never liked attention. He never needed it either. He just wanted to see people who'd had it worse than he had doing well, being well, for sure, life in the care center had sucked in ways that he didn't like to reflect on. However, he had been loved and cherished. He'd known what good parents were like. He'd enjoyed a normal childhood, birthdays, treats, affection. He knew what all of that felt like, and sure, he was open to having more of it, even though he'd had so much already, even when he knew of people who'd had none, but he wanted to give more, too. But he was bad at communicating this, apparently, and well, he supposed there were worse things to go through than having a wonderful community made up of many people from different backgrounds, demanding that he express more self-worth, wasn't there? Being ushered quietly through a maze of corridors, he'd been permitted to look in on Sir Night-Eye. He was sleeping, thank goodness, with Bubble Girl at his bedside, the searing burns of All for One's wrath healing, a new pair of glasses resting on the side table next to his well-bandaged head. Shouta absent-mindedly took his surroundings in. The hospital was sterile, austere, and lacking the tramp and ceremony he thought that he'd find. The technology was top-notch, and the doctors many to be certain, however. He thought the place would be decked out like the American TV shows Inco liked to watch, and yet, as one beige wall bled into another, the officious staff swiftly and efficiently going about their business, it dawned on him just how real this was. That the pro-hero community, that many of them took for granted, wasn't invincible. That the brave men and women and everyone in between did suffer damage, that they felt loss, that them surviving a skirmish, no matter how small, wasn't a guarantee. He's stable, awake, and resting, of course, the doctor leading them said, his four hands flipping through charts and writing notes upon a tablet. But we've put him on a course of painkillers, and Aizawa-san, if I may, we could give you something for your bruising if you like. The roly bruises, he replied, a small smile tilting his lips. I'd much rather you keep your resources for the people who really need them, but thank you all the same, he added, the other six-eyed head inclining at him demurely before they stopped at what seemed to be just another door. No banners, no balloons, no pomp. Well then, and please, Tsukanami-san, this needs to be a short visit so that Yagi-san can rest, the healer ordered. Having said this, being his significant other besides Aizawa-san, if I was wearing a hat, I'd tip it at you, he stated, his words causing the raven-haired man to blink. Significant other? Shigaragi has been responsible for many of my patients that myself and my colleagues have had to treat over the years, he stated, his soft frown turning into a pleased grin. Knowing that he has received even this small modicum of justice has given us all a fine reason to celebrate, so thank you very much for your efforts. Then, stupefied, he'd returned the gentle bow that the doctor gave him, blinked at the lieutenant, who seemed a little sheepish, and sighed. Well, if that was the cover story they needed, so that he could be sneaked in to see the man, then fine. So why did he have such a strong, strange flutter in his chest?